who will be evaluating Julie's speech. Sarah.
Thank you, Madam Toastmaster. Today I get the pleasure of evaluating the inimitable, why can't I say that, Julie Shabash. Julie's purpose today is for her to practice selecting and using a wide variety of visual aids during her speech.
Thank you, Sarah. I don't feel so bad about inimitable speaking. Yes, Julie will be presenting on the 3 learning styles. Please put your screen to speaker view by clicking at the top of the right-hand corner of the screen. This way you will be able to see her virtual background slides better. So everybody got that? And her title is How to Speak So People Will Listen. Time is 6 to 8 minutes, Tom. Let's welcome Julie.
Thank you, Hay, for that inimitable introduction. Do you want to learn how to speak so people will actually listen to you and remember what you've said? Whether it's here in our club giving a speech, or maybe a presentation at work, or if you're just communicating with team members at work. No, you don't need to have a megaphone to get them to hear you. But what you can do is tailor your message so it adapts to many different learning styles. That's the way people are going to remember and absorb what you've shared. Today, I'm going to share with you the 3 primary learning styles. I'm going to give you some tips on what to incorporate in your presentations to best accommodate these different learning styles. And at the end, I'm going to take a poll, so be self-assessing what your primary learning style is while I'm giving this presentation. So the 3 styles are visual learners. These people want to see what they are learning. Auditory learners, they want to hear what they are learning. And kinesthetic learners, they want to feel what they are learning. Visual learners. Visual learners make up about 65% of the population, which is actually the majority of people if you think about it. But our society doesn't necessarily tailor to visual learning. Visual learners want to have diagrams, charts, pictures. These things speak volumes. If you see a picture, that's able to process a lot faster than if you're just spoken to. You can understand a picture's information a lot better. Visual learners, they are very aware visually of what's going on in their environment, so they want to look their best. And they want you to look your best too, because they'll find out any pimple or any tie that's moved the wrong way, because they're very aware of all those things. Visual learners like their environment very tidy and clean, because again, they're aware of their surroundings. They want things written down. They're often great spellers because they remember what they've seen. So how do we speak to a visual learner? Visual learners like a lot of visual aids. They want to see things written out on a whiteboard. They want to see it on a chart, a picture, a diagram. This picture is of Coley, who used to be in our club. He was doing a presentation on his love of biking, and he brought in pictures for a PowerPoint that were fantastic. He had a prop of his bike that really brought his message home. If we can visually see what he's talking about. You could use objects to represent what you're trying to communicate. You could use a project map at work if you're trying to communicate a process or a timeline. That'll go a long way for visual learners. Auditory learners. Auditory learners make up about 30% of the population, which is more of a minority. But when you think about it, society is geared toward auditory learners. We have lectures in educational settings, business meetings, presentations. Those are all communicated verbally, which is really aligned with the auditory learners. Auditory learners are good at persuading and negotiating. They're very eloquent with their words. Tone of voice is very important for auditory learners. They're picking up on your tone and what the emotion is that's being conveyed. Auditory learners are usually the ones asking the questions. They like discussions. Again, that's verbal dialogue. So how do we speak to an auditory learner? Auditory learners really appreciate vocal variety. If you use different tones of your voice, if you emphasize key phrases, an auditory learner will remember that phrase, like Greg did: get up, get on, get going. The auditory learners especially will appreciate that and remember his speech because of those words. You want to keep outside noise to a minimum for auditory learners, because they pick up on any distraction. If there's a baby crying in the background, if there are people talking nearby, they will be picking up on that, and it'll be a distraction from the presentation. Have a Q&A or a discussion. Auditory learners would thrive in that. In the workplace in particular, you want to use more oral communication than a manual or emails with an auditory learner, because they want to hear it verbally and have a dialogue, and they want to ask questions. If you just have it written out in an email, sometimes that's hard for an auditory learner to understand. Lastly, kinesthetic learners. Supposedly, these are only about 5% of learners. I think it's probably more than that. Kinesthetic learners want to feel what they are learning. They like a lot of movement. Society doesn't bode that well for kinesthetic learners, because we are typically in these lecture settings and they get very bored in that setting. They want to move around. They want to do activities like sports, yoga. They like working with their hands. They love physical affection. They want to share their experiences and hear from you about your stories. They want to be touched by what you're sharing. They want to be exhilarated hearing what you're sharing. So stories will definitely help when you're communicating to a kinesthetic learner. So how else do we speak to a kinesthetic learner? Kinesthetic learners get bored very easily. So you want to get them involved in a project, a task. Take breaks often. If you're doing a long presentation that's mostly lecture, you're going to need to take breaks and get people moving. Tony Robbins, the life coach guru, he is great at this. At his conferences, he gets people moving, they're jumping up and down, because he says when you get your body moving, then your brain is moving, you're digesting the information a lot better. Kinesthetic learners appreciate group work and role playing. Have a stand-up meeting. That's getting the blood pumping. Kinesthetic learners will appreciate that. So now, what is your learning style? For the visual learners, I know you want to see everybody who is a visual learner. So type in the chat, I am a visual learner, if you are a visual learner, so we can all see. If you are an auditory learner, we know you all want to hear who are the auditory learners. So take yourself off mute and say, I am an auditory learner. I am an auditory learner personally.
I'm auditory.
I'm auditory.
I'm auditory and visual.
Yes, you can be all three. You tend to have more of a primary one. For the kinesthetic learners, we know you want to get moving, so show us some movement. Show us some movement. Yes. So we have a pretty good representation here of all the different learning styles. So remember, you don't need a megaphone to get people to listen to you. But what you can do is tailor your speaking style so people can see what you're saying, they can hear what you're saying, and they can feel what you're saying. This is how you're going to influence people and get your message across. Back to you, Madam Toastmaster.
Thank you, Julie.
Get to end our path with pathways as many times as we want. So it's just a matter of getting through these paths. But that's what Craig is doing today. He is wrapping up the motivational strategies path, and he does so with this speech that he's about to give us. I'm looking forward to what he's learned about his motivational strategies path, and I will evaluate on that a little bit later in the meeting.
Thank you, Dan. Craig has completed his motivational strategy path and going to reminisce about the journey. However, Instead of Craig only telling you about his journey's success, he will ask for audience participation to assess the success of Craig's path. Let's welcome Craig Hafer.
I love you. I love each and every one of you. And I know that we are all connected. My heart goes out to you and your family, Mila. Very sadly, Pikes Peak Toastmaster members have left the club due to illness. I have seen neighbors on both sides of our house and across the street fall ill to cancer and a heart attack. I have learned that 80% of chronic illness is preventable. We all feel the pain when one of us becomes ill, and that is why I chose the motivational strategies path to share what I have learned about health. There are two parts to influencing others. The first is simply to convey the message. Without hearing and comprehending a message, one does not know a new path exists. The second is motivation. Once the message is heard and understood, will individuals actually begin to move in a new direction? I will break this speech into two parts to help me understand the impact of my speeches on my fellow Toastmasters, the message and the motivation. I'm going to start with a poll to determine how many of you heard in the past 3 years what I wanted to share. Sterling, would you please pull up the message poll? Please vote on this poll. And while you're taking a minute to vote on this poll, please think of what you could put in your chat message at the end of this speech to help me convey my message to fellow Toastmasters. Okay, Sterling, could you end the poll and share the results? I'm really happy with that. 15 of you, plant-based whole food lifestyle. Okay, pull the poll down, please, Sterling. I was willing to give everybody credit for this because you see, a plant-based whole food lifestyle may be the foundation and the focus of my message of health, but the goal is really to live a healthy American dream, whatever that dream is for you. And exercise, moving, and any form of meditation are just as important. My message has been focused on the foundation of health, plant-based whole food. Now I want to briefly review 3 speeches I have given related to my message. The first speech is the time machine. We're all traveling back in time to the 1950s. So some of you aren't old enough, but travel back with me anyway. In the 1950s, the average cost of a new home was $8,500. Smoking was common and on the rise. The tobacco companies were major sponsors of the American Medical Association. And you would see cigarette commercials on TV, such as how doctors prefer Camels. And for those of you that aren't around cigarettes, Camels is a brand of cigarettes. The latest research in the 1950s showed the detrimental effects of smoking, but did not reach the medical profession. I showed and discussed several pretend books, including How Not to Die from Smoking, Prevent and Reverse Lung Disease, and the China Study, showing that the Chinese that didn't smoke didn't have lung disease. Even when people would hear about the destructive harm of cigarette smoking in the 1950s, they may simply have not believed it or rationalized their reason for no change in smoking behavior for reasons such as, it's addictive and I can't quit. All my friends smoke. It's a social thing. My grandmother lived her whole life smoking and died at age 95. My doctor smokes and says it's not harmful. All the information I've seen says it's good for you. It relaxes you, helps you keep weight off, may relieve symptoms of ulcerative colitis. The question I posed from this speech was, how can I reach my audience so they will take some action? The second speech I want to review with you is an allegory. And I want to thank you, Barry, for helping me understand a new word as you reviewed this speech for me. Allegory, in this case, means a story with a hidden meaning. Again, this is the time machine. Only this time we're going to travel into the future to the year 2184. This was a story about the Autonomous People Transporter, or the APT for short, and previously known as the automobile or car. The APT, the Autonomous People Transporter, was self-repairing, self-learning, and basically a living entity living on biomass, including food scraps and animal byproducts. The APTs in the US were having issues with their molecular motion cells becoming degraded. The mechanics, with over 8 years of training, were the only ones to administer additives for specific failed self-repair issues. Some APTs completely failed at half their life expectancy and had to be scrapped. At the same time, research was showing that APTs in Africa, consuming only whole plant fuel, out grazing in the fields, were living well past their life expectancy with no mechanic intervention. I left it to the audience's imagination whether the American Mechanics Association, better known as the AMA, would voluntarily begin requiring training in the cause and prevention of self-repair failure at the mechanics schools, or whether man would simply develop a Star Trek type transporter, thereby making the APTs obsolete. The third speech is titled The Road Less Traveled. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and it has made all the difference. Robert Frost. I grew up in Billings, Montana in the 1960s, eating great home-cooked meals, including fried chicken on Sundays. Occasionally, we ate hamburgers at Henry's Drive-In, or we would go out and eat pizza. We were eating the standard American diet. My dad loved steaks and would eat steaks every day when he was working and on an expense report. He had his first heart attack when he was 67 years old. By the time he was 80, he had no short-term memory. You see, coronary artery disease does not affect just the heart arteries, but all the arteries in the body. He had microstrokes in the brain, which affected his memory. He passed away at age 94, sleeping 16 hours a day for the last 14 years of his life. My mom passed away at age 86 with cancer. She became confused and had short-term memory issues the last 3 years of her life. I was headed down the same road in the wood as my parents. In 2009, my cholesterol was high. At the same time, I was running 50 miles a week and 5 marathons a year. I couldn't outrun the cholesterol. My doctor prescribed a statin drug for me. After 6 months on the drug, the side effect of neuromuscular damage ended my fast marathon running days. In 2014, I ran across this book, The China Study. And along with my wife, I took the road less traveled. And that has made all the other difference. That has made all the difference. The other 2 books that helped me down the road were this book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease, and How Not to Die by Michael Greger. 1 month after adopting a plant-based, whole food lifestyle, my cholesterol was 148. I'd lost 30, my cholesterol numbers went down 30%. All my biometrics were optimal. In 2009, my doctor told me I had no choice of roads to take. She told me coronary artery disease is hereditary and that because my dad had it, I would have it. I was fortunate to find and take the road less traveled. I have virtually no risk or concerns of any chronic disease. Will you do your own research and consider taking the road less traveled? It has made all the difference for me. It might for you too. Now, Sterling, would you please pull up the motivation poll? Please end the poll and show the results, Sterling. Well, I'm happy to say that people are eating more plants. Sometimes you need to hear the message 3 times and sometimes from 3 sources. And even then, the recipient of the message may not be ready to change. I love you. I love all of you. Madam Toastmaster.